Good morning and welcome. The Billiard Center for Social Justice here at Trinity is thrilled to welcome Congressman James McGovern from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts. It is a joy to welcome Congressman McGovern here to Trinity this morning. He is an extraordinary member of the House of Representatives. In Massachusetts, he is highly esteemed. The people in his district have great admiration for him. But his name spreads beyond the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts because he is not just an excellent legislator, he is a powerful witness. He's very concerned about issues of social justice and human rights, and he's able to see the interconnection among those issues. And he works hard on Capitol Hill on some very important committees, particularly the House Rules Committee and the House Agriculture Committee, the House Hunger Caucus, and the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And in and of itself, that's important work. But he does something in addition to all of that. He makes real these issues for the rest of us. And he gives witness to how difficult life is for many of our own brothers and sisters every day of the week in this country and beyond. A couple of examples. Congressman McGovern was one of the few members of Congress to try to live on food stamps for a month. And he will tell you how he did during that month. Secondly, this summer in Worcester, Massachusetts, he spent an overnight in a homeless shelter to see what it was like to be a guest in a shelter. And he made certain not to take a cot from a guest. He slept on the couch, but he spent a lot of the night talking to his fellow guests to see what is it like to be without a home. So for these reasons and many more, we from Massachusetts are so proud of him because he is not just a legislator, he is a witness, and as those of us who are Christian, we would say he is a disciple. So Congressman Jim McGovern, welcome.
Well, first of all, let me thank Sister Mary Johnson for that very generous introduction. After that build-up, I can hardly wait to hear what I'm going to say. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm grateful to the Sisters of Notre Dame for their mission and for all that they do for their school, but their mission in particular, which is one of social justice and kind of lifting all boats. President McGuire, thank you very much for the wonderful welcome here, and I'm also happy to be here with a former colleague, former Congresswoman Barbara Kennelly, who was an outstanding member of Congress, continues to be an incredible advocate, and I wish I could take her course on political science. I think I can learn a lot from it, but anyway, I'm really happy to be here. And let me thank you as well. I saw the sign, hunger is not a game, it's real. Learn how to help end hunger now. I really, when I see signs like this, focusing on issues that really matter, it really makes my heart feel full. It makes me really thrilled to be with all of you, because I know at this school in particular, it's more than just about getting a diploma. What you go through is not just coursework, but kind of training in how to be a better advocate on behalf of everybody in this country. How to have a commitment to social justice. How to make a difference in the world. And I like the mission at this school because it's about more than you. It's about everybody. I was raised a Catholic in Worcester, Massachusetts. That's where I'm from. If I speak a little funny, that's why. It's that Massachusetts accent. We don't pronounce our R's very well, but in any event. And to be honest with you, a lot of the teachings of the Catholic Church didn't really sink into my head until I was much older. And I was working as a congressional aide, and to a guy named Joe Moakley from Massachusetts, and Barbara knows who he is. And there were 6 Jesuit priests who were murdered in El Salvador. And we were asked to lead the investigation into finding out what the truth was. And so I was the key staff person to do that. And I spent an awful lot of time over a period of about 2 years with the Jesuits in El Salvador. And it was kind of a rebirth of my own faith. Because I believe that faith is more than about ritual, it is about action. So I don't care if you go to church 20 times a day, 7 days a week, if you don't do anything when you leave that church, I don't think you're a very faithful person. It is about living the teachings, it is about making a difference. And on this issue of hunger, for me, my first introduction to this really came when I was in college. I went to American University, not too far from here, and I decided I was going to get an internship, and I wanted to intern for a guy named George McGovern, who's no relation. I thought he had a good last name, but I remember his campaign for president. He was against the war. He was for all the social justice issues that, even as a young high school student, made me feel good, that these are the things I wanted to be connected with. So I went to work for him. And George McGovern was the chair of a special select committee on hunger and nutrition. And he championed these issues because he did hearings all across the country, along with Robert Kennedy and Bob Dole, in a bipartisan way in the 1960s and 1970s, seeing firsthand the face of hunger in the United States. And as a result of that, we saw an improvement in our child nutrition programs and our school meal programs. We had programs like WIC, Women's, Infants, and Children program, that became the law of the land. We saw an expansion in the food stamp program, now known as SNAP, and on and on and on. And believe it or not, in the late 1970s, when you looked at the statistics, we were actually making great progress toward eliminating hunger in this country. That has kind of changed dramatically, unfortunately. And today, in the United States, close to 50 million of our fellow citizens are hungry. 17 million of them are kids. And when I got elected to Congress, this became even more real to me. Because when I worked for George McGovern, I would go to the hearings and I would listen to the experts all testify. But when I got elected to Congress, the people that were coming to my office, the people that I was meeting on the street, weren't academics, weren't members of Congress, weren't, nutritionists or doctors, or leading experts on the subject. They were real people. So mothers would show up to my office looking for help because they didn't have enough money to put food on the table for their family. I had people stop me on the street and tell me, we don't have enough to be able to feed our family for an entire week. I was told over and over that the benefits that the government provides, while appreciated, are not enough. What we provide people in terms of assistance doesn't keep up with the rising cost of food or the rising cost of living in this country. And we need help. And, when you meet anybody who's hungry, it is startling. When you meet a child who doesn't have enough to eat, it breaks your heart. And for me, who's been very lucky, living in the United States of America, the richest country in the history of the world, that anybody in this country goes without food, to me is unconscionable. It just doesn't have to be. And I have come to the conclusion that hunger is a political condition. And the reason why I say that is because we have the resources here. We have the food. We have the money, if we wanted to invest it to fix this problem. We have the brain power and the infrastructure. We have everything we need to eradicate hunger in the United States of America. What we are missing is the political will. And so when people talk to you about the importance of being involved in politics, one of the reasons why is because that is the way you change realities in this country. That is the way you change the realities in this world. If Congress wanted to, it could appropriate the money. It could better connect the dots on all the nutrition programs we have. We can make this a priority. We can actually solve this problem. And one of the problems right now in Washington is that everybody thinks very small. When you hear politicians run for office, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, everybody gets up and they begin by saying, oh, we get this terrible debt, this terrible deficit, and so all we can promise you is we're going to cut. You know, we can't solve anything big because we got this terrible deficit and this terrible debt. And I remind people when they say that to me is that on the issue of hunger, we cannot afford not to fix it because hunger is expensive. It is expensive. So children who don't have enough to eat, you know, when they get sick, their immune system is compromised. They end up maybe with what we would call a common cold, but they can't handle it, so they end up in a hospital for days, if not weeks. Mothers who are pregnant, who don't have the proper nutrition, oftentimes give birth to babies with a multitude of problems that will require a lifetime of care. Workers who do not have enough to rely on a meal every day end up being less productive at the workforce. Kids who miss meals at home and go to school on an empty stomach don't learn. You just don't learn. You can't learn when your stomach is empty, when all you can think about is you're hungry. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. And there's also this link between hunger and obesity in this country. So because you have people who are, you know, barely have enough to put food on the table, you end up buying sometimes the cheapest, the junkiest food that is available, that will last the longest. Usually stuff that's filled with empty calories, stuff that's not very good for you. Just in order to kind of keep people, look, I got 2 kids, you want to keep your kids, just stop complaining, you know? So you do what you got to do. And then you end up with issues like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, you know, high blood pressure, sometimes chronic disease that will last a lifetime, require a lifetime of care. So if people are not moved by the moral obligation to feed the hungry, to make sure everybody in this country has access to a good, nutritious meal, then if all you care about is the bottom line, then we ought to do something about this. Because it is very, very costly, it is very, very expensive to do what we're doing right now. Now, I'm on the Agriculture Committee, notwithstanding the fact that I represent primarily an urban district. And Nancy Pelosi, who is very famous at this school, I had a conversation with her a few years ago saying, I think I'd like to go on the Agriculture Committee. And she said, well, you don't have any farms in your district. I said, well, I have a couple. Now that I'm redistricting, I have much more, actually. But I said, but here's the deal. All of our, most of our most important nutrition programs are in USDA, in the Department of Agriculture. And yet, the people on the Ag Committee are all people who are there because they want to protect the sugar beet subsidy, or corn subsidy, or sugar subsidy, or whatever kind of subsidy there is, and that's the only thing they care about. That's the thing they're most obsessed about. They'll vote for any farm bill that protects their subsidy. I said, but we need to have someone on there, and more people, who also will speak up for some of these nutrition programs. So she helped me get on this committee. I had to get a waiver because I'm on the Rules Committee, which is an exclusive committee. You can only be on one committee. So she said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I went on the committee. And the first year I was on there, we had a farm bill debate. And I asked Republicans and Democrats, does anyone know what the average food stamp benefit is? This was a few years ago. Yeah, so a day, it's back then, it was like about $1.20 per meal per day. But nobody in the Agriculture Committee could tell me what it was. I got answers like, it's adequate, oh, it's very generous, it's enough, you know, but no one could tell me with any specificity what it was. So a handful of us decided, you know what, we need to let people know what it is. Because I don't think most members of Congress know what it is that an average person on food stamps has to live on. So we lived on a food stamp diet for a week. And we kept a blog, and we raised the issue. We raised the issue. And we went shopping. And I went shopping with two people who are both on SNAP, who helped teach me about how to stretch my food stamp dollar, where to get the bargains from, you know. And one of the things they told me is you're not going to be able to afford, you know, a lot of the foods that you normally would eat. And I remember feeling so happy that there was this hamburger that was on sale, and I was like, well, at least I'll have meat one night. And it was like a big chunk of hamburger. And then I realized I was on sale because when I brought it home and cooked it, it shrunk down to like nothing. Because it was probably the fattiest, most unhealthy hamburger that I think existed on this planet up until that point. I couldn't afford my coffee. I rely on coffee every day. But if I had coffee, then I wouldn't be able to get something else. And the deal was you had to stretch it for a week. You couldn't cheat. And I couldn't eat at receptions. I couldn't take advantage of any of the snacks in my office. We wanted to do this to show how difficult it is. And about 6 of us began it, and I think about 3 of us finished it. One guy didn't finish it because he wanted to live on peanut butter, and when he flew back to his district, the peanut butter was confiscated at TSA. So we give him a little bit of a pass on that. But although he did tell me he had a steak that night, so I don't. But the point of the matter is that for us, it was a week-long exercise. It was a beginning, a middle, and an end for a week. You know, it's not that difficult, although it was a lot more difficult than we thought it was going to be. And you know what? When you're not eating your normal amount and you're going without things that you normally rely on, it's just kind of hard to focus during the day. And so we're irritable, cranky, you know, not particularly interested in doing a lot. But it was, for us, it was an exercise. For millions and millions and millions and millions of families in this country, it is a way of life. And it is a way of life that people, quite frankly, especially in Congress, do not appreciate. I'm going to tell you something that will come as a shock to many of you in this audience. But intelligence is not a prerequisite for serving in the United States Congress. And I say that to you because more and more and more, the people who are getting elected to office are people who are very well off. You know, there was a time when the Millionaires Club was only the United States Senate. It is now not only the United States Senate, it is increasingly the United States House of Representatives. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be a millionaire and not feel for people and do the right thing, but I'm simply saying that the types of people that are coming here, you have people that really have never sat down and talked to anybody who live on SNAP. You know, have never been to a food bank, have never been to a food pantry. You know, have no idea about the reality that thousands and millions of their constituents are experiencing every day. It's just a fact. And so that's what we do. We do things like the food stamp challenge to try to get people connected. We're also trying to get people to come to Capitol Hill more and talk to their elected officials. You know, if people don't come and talk about their realities, it's probably not likely that that representative will find out about that reality any other way. There's a group based out of Philadelphia called Witnesses to Hunger. A doctor, a children's doctor, Dr. Mariana Chilton at one of the big hospitals in Philadelphia, decided to organize a group of women around this issue of hunger, and she gave them all cameras. And she said, you go home and you document what the face of hunger is. And then we will take those pictures and we'll bring them to the State House, we'll bring them to the governor, we'll bring them to Washington, we'll bring them to Congress. You know, we need to get the message out, what this is all about. And so she did. She gave all these women cameras, and the pictures that they took, you know, were heartbreaking. I mean, they were sad. They were, you know, and yet there was something also very inspirational about what was on display there. And that was that these mothers, you know, were doing anything they could do to make sure their kids had what they needed. And so we brought them to Washington and had them go around, and if they couldn't meet with senators, we taught them, you know, kind of the guerrilla tactics of, you know, where to stand during votes, and then you jump out at the senators and you grab them and you get them there. Same with the House of Representatives. And they are taught, and now the Witnesses to Hunger movement is growing. We have one in Boston right now. And again, raising awareness, raising these issues, so that there's no excuse for somebody to say they did not know. And it's been this incredibly powerful movement that's growing and growing and growing. But we're still kind of at an impasse. We had a new farm bill that came out that cut SNAP and other nutrition programs. Not as much as some of my colleagues in the House wanted to, but still cut it nonetheless. And I said to my colleagues on the Agriculture Committee that I'm willing to support any farm bill that doesn't make hunger worse. I didn't even say you have to make it better. You know, it's just, you just can't make it any worse. And unfortunately, the bill that Congress passed could not claim to do that. It made it more difficult for millions of families in this country. And to be honest with you, I think there's enough shame to go around on everybody, Republicans, Democrats, even the White House. I mean, you know, there's some issues you want to draw a line in the sand on. This is one of those issues where you should draw a line in the sand on. You know, if you're gonna subsidize the sugar industry and the corn industry and all these big kind of mega agribusinesses, the least you can do is say, this bill will ensure that not one additional person in this country goes hungry. Boy, that's not a very high standard, but it's one that unfortunately that bill couldn't meet. But what was particularly troublesome to me about that whole debate on the Farm Bill was the way poor people in this country were characterized by members of Congress on the House floor. We had a colleague of mine who was arguing for a $40 billion cut in the SNAP program, and he said like 6 or 7 times in a period of 3 minutes on the House floor, the reason why we need to trim this program is because I'm tired of rapists, pedophiles, and murderers getting SNAP benefits. And I heard it the first time, I said, he must have misspoke, you know. But after 4, 5, 6, 7 times, you know, I said, enough! What the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about? That's just not right. How can you talk about this program or the people who benefit from this program that way? And the danger of that kind of rhetoric is that you get people who watch C-SPAN, and you get people who watch the news when a clip of that is on the news, and you get people all of a sudden, I'm getting people calls to my office, why does Congressman McGovern support giving food stamps to rapists, pedophiles, and murderers? And it's, you know, it's maddening when you have to end up trying to correct what is a lie. But unfortunately, this kind of notion that people just want to be on food stamps is a growing perception. I mean, some of the right-wing media have kind of pushed that attitude that just people, you know, it's like you hit the jackpot when you're poor enough to be on SNAP. Really? I mean, if I had the choice, and by the way, the majority of able-bodied people on SNAP, the majority work. So when people say, oh, I ought to get a job, the majority who can work. The majority of people on the program are children, are senior citizens, and are the disabled. Now, unless you want to repeal the child labor laws or send grandma back to work, I mean, the bottom line is, of those who can, the majority work. And yet, if I did a poll in this country today and asked that question, how many people on SNAP work? who are able to work. I think the overwhelming impression, because of what they hear over and over and over by the naysayers and the critics, is that the majority of people do not work. That is just not true. That is just not true. They work. And given the choice between a job that pays a livable wage, one that would enable me to go to the supermarket and buy whatever I want for my family, and buy nutritious food, and buy vegetables, and buy milk instead of soda. I mean, if I had the resources to do that, yeah, I think people would prefer the job that paid you those resources. Be able to do it, so you can make the healthy choices. You know, but the fact of the matter is that in this country today, there are a lot of jobs out there that just don't pay a livable wage. Now, the president, to his credit, has talked about increasing the minimum wage. That would help lift a whole bunch of people out of SNAP and transition them into a more independent status. However, even with the minimum wage he's talking about, it's still too low if you're getting paid absolute minimum wage to get out of poverty. I think one of the reforms that we ought to be talking about is that in this country, if you work for a living, you ought not to live in poverty. Whatever that livable wage is, whatever it is, if you work, you ought to be able to not be in poverty. It should be that simple. And that's one of the things that, you know, Congress can make a difference on. And unfortunately, right now, we're dealing with a Congress that we can't even get a vote on a minimum wage, never mind on a livable wage. But if you want to help people transition off of this benefit, pay them enough so they can live a decent life when they go to work. You know, the other thing that we need to do is acknowledge that the way our governmental system is set up and all these programs that are designed to help people transition out of poverty, they're not connected very well. So like SNAP is under USDA, you get some other nutrition programs that are under HHS, you get some Department of Defense programs, you got, the TANF is under this agency, everything's under multiple agencies. And, you know, Sister Mary talked about that I spent a night in a family homeless shelter in Worcester. And it was a really interesting experience for me because these are families, entire families that are homeless. And almost every adult that I talked to in that homeless shelter worked. And they earned just enough where their SNAP benefits were reduced to almost nothing, where they didn't qualify for the state homeless programs. But they didn't earn enough to be able to really put food on the table for the kids or pay or afford a down payment and a rent on an apartment in Worcester. And they're like, what do you want me to do? I'm working, and I'm worse off now than I was before. So we need to rethink this kind of the way we transition people to self-sufficiency, so that there's more flexibility. Quite frankly, some of these benefits ought to stay with people a little bit longer until they truly are self-sufficient. Not some artificial cutoff number that some bureaucrat in Washington came up with. Our goal here is not simply about making sure that everybody has food when they need it. Our goal here also should be to help families be able to become independent, to help transition people to jobs. That's why, you know, I was talking to President McGovern before about how important Pell Grants are. You know, and I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of Pell Grants, not just because of you, and I want you all to have great lives. But you know what? When you succeed, it helps me too. Helps my family too. When you reach your potential, I mean, when you solve some of the social problems and the economic problems that our country is facing, when you find cures to diseases, when you go, you head up a new company, when you're a teacher, when you're the president of a university, we all benefit from that, not just you. So I will tell you, I support these programs as a way to help people move to independence, not just because I like you, but I like me too. And there's a selfish reason for this. And it's something that that I don't think a lot of people think about. So this is all, so I'm going to close with this, and then we can talk about whatever you want here. I have, for 6 years, been trying to get the administration to do a White House conference on food and nutrition, basically to bring everybody together. I mean, anybody who has anything to do with finding a solution to the hunger problem in this country. I mean, educators, hospitals, philanthropists, heads of food banks, heads of food pantries, clients on SNAP, people who have successfully transitioned off of SNAP, the faith-based community. I want everybody in a room at the White House, lock the door, and say, here's the deal. We are not going to adjourn this meeting until we accomplish at least one thing. And that one thing is we ought to have a plan. So if I love the president, but if I were to say to him, or his predecessor, or anybody before that, Mr. President, what is the plan to end hunger in America? Now, he probably said, well, we get the SNAP program, or we get the WIC program, we get the whole litany of things we have. And we do have those programs. But they can work better. They can work better. And we're not connecting the dots. We don't have any benchmarks. We don't, I mean, hunger getting a little bit better in this country, but still we're way above the levels we were at before the recession. And we're way, way above the levels we were in the late 1970s. How do we do this better? What is the plan? What works? And one of the things we do know is one glove doesn't fit all. So what may work in Washington, D.C. might not work in Worcester, Massachusetts. Might not work in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But how do we make this so that whatever works fits? And how do we do this in a way that and again, this is not about, because so many of the reforms we hear about in Washington are punitive. It's like, we're going to punish you because you're poor. We're going to punish you because you're not earning enough money. No. We got to be thinking in terms of ladders of opportunity for people. We got to be thinking about how do we make this work? How do we set a goal saying in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, hunger will be eradicated in the United States? And if we do that, you know what? Hopefully it'll be contagious and other countries will want to follow. We had one other, only in the history of this country, we only had one other conference on food and nutrition. And that was when Richard Nixon was president. And can't believe I'm saying anything nice about Richard Nixon, but that conference at the White House helped bring together a bipartisan coalition that included some of the great liberals and great conservatives to come together to actually help strengthen our social safety net in this country. It made a difference. It wasn't just a conference for a conference. And I know people don't like to talk about issues like poverty. I know people don't, we all want to be upbeat, especially before elections, and, the pollsters all tell you how to use this language and this word and that word. But look, we got to start solving some big problems. And this is one of them. And this is one of them. And so I will end as I began by saying this is a political condition. You here in this campus, I know, are doing work with Martha's Table, DC Central Kitchen, all the local stuff. Keep on doing it. You are touching people's lives. You are making a difference, and it is really inspiring. The other thing is, in addition to that social activism, use your voices and use your power as voters to be powerful political advocates. We need to change the reality in this country. We're going yet into another war, and it's like, no problem, we're going into another war. But yet we can't seem to get the political will together to fight a war on poverty, a war on hunger in this country. I mean, I got to tell you, most of my constituents that I talk to lose sleep at night, not wondering, what foreign adversary is going to drop a bomb on them, but they worry about things like whether or not they have enough resources to put food on the table for their kids. They worry about, can they afford a college education? They worry about job security, retirement security, pension security, all those kinds of things. And so we need to, we need to understand that this is also a national security issue as well, because the health and well-being and the economic security of our citizens, if that's not national security, then I don't know what is. So I thank you for having me here today, and look forward to a vigorous discussion. Thank you.
We have time for questions and comments, and I would invite you to ask the Congressman about issues related to hunger and other issues that he is engaged with on Capitol Hill. Professor Matt Bates' communication class did a lot of work the month of September to prepare for this visit of the Congressman. They have materials outside on hunger, and one of the things that the students learned is that there's a connection among all the social justice issues. So I'd love to pose the first question, and then I'll be seated and you can handle the others. But I know you have spoken out about our response to ISIS. So could you say a little bit about where you think things stand right now and what your position is?
So these are obviously very challenging and difficult times, and I think it is vitally important, especially as we get, it looks like we're kind of getting sucked into yet another war, that there be a full and honest and open debate. And I got to be honest with you, I'm a little bit appalled that Congress left for our break before the election without debating and voting on an authorization about justifying this war. And I was listening to the Speaker of the House on TV the other day. He said, well, we'll do that at a later date. And somebody said, well, will you do it when you come back from the election? He said, well, really, we should actually wait until the next Congress gets seated. That's in February or so. I'm appalled that the Speaker, someone didn't hand the Speaker the Constitution, which basically explained very clearly that Congress has a role in whether or not we go to war, number one. Number two, I tried to force a vote on this in July because I had the sense that we were going down this road. And we ended up passing a resolution 370 to 40 that said, this was in July, that if the United States is engaged in sustained military combat in Iraq, then Congress ought to convene and debate as to whether or not to vote for an authorization or not. So that was in July. In August, during our break, we began to bomb Iraq. And we bombed to the point where by the time we were coming back, we were bombing every day. And then the President gave a speech and said, we're going to bomb Syria. And this is going to go on for many years. And no matter where you are on this issue, it's hard for me to believe that you would not want to have that debate. Is this the right thing to do? And I'm going to tell you what my misgivings are. I was against the war in Iraq. I voted to go after Osama bin Laden when in the aftermath of September 11th. But the war in Afghanistan is not going after Al-Qaeda anymore. It is, I don't know what it is today, and we're still there. The mission has changed so many times that I've lost count. And we're no longer going after Al-Qaeda, we're going after the Taliban and 1,000 other groups. I mean, this is a whole different scenario that we're in right now. And when the administration says, well, we're using the authorization votes of 2001 and 2002 to justify our action in 2014, I'm like, it's ludicrous. Life is different in 2014 than it was in 2001, and we ought to have this debate. And here's the value of debate. Sometimes, during debate, people make some good points, and whoever's in power says, that's a good point, maybe we need to adjust our strategy. Because sometimes the debate can lead to good things. Sometimes, if I'm just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, then, the president's position will get even stronger. I mean, there's value in debate. But to say that we'll come back in February and maybe we're going to have a vote to authorize a war retroactively, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I've met too many returning veterans, who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. There's Suicide rates are at an all-time high. My nephew just came back from his second deployment in Afghanistan. Very upset by, what he sees that we're doing over there. Countless civilians were killed. We've been misled on Iraq and on Afghanistan. I just think we ought to have an opportunity for the greatest kind of democratic governing body in the world to actually behave like it for a little bit and have that debate. I just worry that we're going down a road where there's no end. And my question in all these briefings is, tell me how this ends. Tell me how this ends. Because if you're going to go to war, you ought to have a clearly defined mission, a beginning, middle, and an end. And make no mistake, ISIS is awful. They are twisting the teachings of Islam. This is not about religion. This is a fanatical group. We ought to be very clear on that. But ultimately, the reason why ISIS is in Iraq is because of the failed government that ran Iraq. The government we helped put in power that decided to exclude certain ethnic groups, certain religious minorities, and it literally forced moderate opposition groups to join with the more extreme. And in Syria, I'm a little bit confused because we're now bombing ISIS that the president of Syria says he welcomes, yet we're supposed to be against the president of Syria, so I'm confused. And about arming moderate rebels, you know what? We armed moderate rebels against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. They turned out to then use them against us in Al-Qaeda. We armed Iraq when their enemy was Iran, and then they turned out using those weapons against us. The weapons that ISIS has, soldiers in Iraq that we trained for 10 years took out their uniforms and handed over U.S. weapons to these people. We're now learning that we're bombing U.S. vehicles and U.S. Humvees every day because the enemy now has our weaponry. So I'll just close with this. I don't know what the answer is here, but I wish there was a little bit more imagination in this town so that the choices were not always do nothing or go to war. I mean, maybe there's got to be something in between. And yet those are the two choices we're being given. And I'm uneasy about it, and I don't want to be here 10 years from now talking to you about a war that began that no one asked any questions about, and the next thing we know we're broke. One final thing, just so you should know, when people talk to you about we can't afford to invest in nutrition programs, we don't have the money, you should ask them why aren't we that stingy when it comes to war? The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not paid for. They went on our credit card. So trillions of dollars of our debt are unpaid for wars. I actually introduced a bill that everybody shot down immediately, but it said this: if you're going to go to war, you ought to pay for it. The President and Congress ought to tax the American people. If the American people don't want to pay the tax, then maybe you ought not to go to war. But the idea that you're sending my nephew, that you're sending you or your brothers or sisters or fathers or mothers over to fight in a war, and you're the only one asked to sacrifice, and the rest of the country can just sit back and kind of watch it as if it was a video game, I think we got to stop that. War is a big deal. People are dying every day in these wars, and we need to rethink our approach to these wars in the future. Yeah, so for the next 5 years, they're not going to happen because that's the Farm Bill takes you for 5 years. But there is a growing amount that is not anywhere near what these other subsidies are. But there's a growing investment that we're seeing in the Farm Bill for fresh fruits and vegetables. That's where the subsidies ought to be, so that when you go to the store, the nutritious foods are actually more affordable, and the junkier foods are more expensive. And so there is this growing movement to that. I think, depending on what the Congress looks like, by the time there's the next Farm Bill, and how awareness in this country continues to grow on these issues, you know, hopefully we're going to be looking for a more rational farm bill. But remember this, you know, if you're a big corporate special interest getting a taxpayer subsidy, you know, what they do is go out and they build constituencies, saying if you eliminate my subsidy for whatever the junk food may be, you know, then it'll, you know, your food prices will go up, we'll lose jobs, the world will come to an end. I mean, the whole, and some of these big agribusinesses are very well off. They're very well funded. They give money to political campaigns. They have political action committees. They invest in campaigns. So I think the answer to your question is, I think over a period of time we're moving toward getting it better, and hopefully getting it right. But in the immediate term, we're kind of stuck where we're stuck. And look, and I think one of the things that's happening here is the American consumer is becoming more educated, and as the healthcare profession is more engaged in some of these issues in particular, you know, we're beginning to see some of the pressure build for access to more healthier foods. I should just also tell you that transition to a better day is going to be a tough battle. The First Lady, to her credit, fought for legislation to raise the nutritional standards of the school feeding programs. And now you've got kind of the junk food industry that are fueling this kind of backlash, saying, you know, I don't want government telling me what I can eat. I should be able to eat whatever I want, blah, 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 the whole thing. And this effort to try to repeal those standards. That would be a very stupid thing to do. But yet it is something that is kind of rearing its head in the Congress. And anything to slow down the advancement of nutritional standards, I think would be a huge mistake. And the one thing I've learned, because I come from a generation where, quite frankly, growing up, we didn't talk a lot about nutrition. I mean, I think, you know, and I love my mother, but I think I was like a Twinkie and Coke for breakfast. I mean, that was our family. It's harder to change your habits when you are older than it is when you are younger. And young children who get used to healthier foods will go home and ask their mothers or fathers or grandmothers or grandfathers for healthier foods. I mean, it is the way it works. And so if we get to these kids young, we can help produce a generation that will be healthier and less costly.
I just wanted to share that I have a personal, story and effect of how junk food can definitely affect me. You know, I'm just now recovering from like a 2-week junk food binge. I'm normally like a pretty healthy person, but for some reason I started to eat more of the chips and the cookies. And once I started to put that stuff in my body, it seemed like my body started craving more. So like I started to eat those things for about 2 weeks. And after the 2 weeks, I felt really fat and like nasty and just tired and depressed. And like it not only affected me physically, but it affected me mentally. Like I just wasn't as motivated, and like that was really a wake-up call for me. And what you were saying about, you know, when you don't have as much money and you buy like the stuff that has more sodium, and you know, I mean, I know that the way that I feel about myself and talking to other people and talking to family, like the way you feel about yourself, your confidence helps you to perform better, like at work, helps you to perform better at school. You know, the way that I relate to other people. If I have a great, you know, upbeat personality or a feeling for myself, then that's the way that I'm going to interact with other people. That I'm going to bring that to school. I'm going to bring that to work. And like you said, it affects all areas. And the way that I got back from, you know, the junk food binge is just like to put my foot down and say, hey, I don't want to feel like this anymore. So what can I do to get into the solution of it? And what I did is I increased my water level. I ate fruits and vegetables. You know, I completely cut out the high sodium snacks, and you know, I started doing more exercises, different exercises. But I really took an interest on how am I going to change this. And so I say all that to say, so I care. You know, that's basically what happened. Like I saw what I was doing was affecting me, and so I decided I'm going to actually care and take care of myself. So I feel like that's a huge component in making a change. Like you have to care, you know. And so if like people in Congress or House of Representatives care about this issue, then they'll make strides to make it different. And so that's where like it's like when you talk about a solution. So how do you get people to care about something that normally like don't necessarily?
Well, first of all, I wish we could put you in a commercial. And your point about, I mean, your own experience, I mean, if you eat junk food, you feel kind of junky. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have junk food every once in a while, but my brother-in-law has rheumatoid arthritis, have decided, someone suggested he live on a